in a couple of minutes. Bye.
I guess we'll be asking everybody later on to put into the chat their name and their organization, but for those who are here currently, perhaps you'll do that, and then we will know who has been attending.
Since it has been 2 o'clock on my computer, I think we can start this webinar. A warm welcome to everybody who has joined. I expect that more people will join while we go along. And I have a few household things before we start the webinar. First of all, we would very much like if people who are joining this webinar add in the chat box what their affiliation is. What organization are you from? So we have a better idea who is who and who our audience is today. So thank you very much. This is the 12th and final webinar of Project APARSEN. This is also the webinar in which we like to explain more about the final result and the element that we hope will live beyond the duration of the project, and that is the Virtual Center of Excellence. The project has been in existence for 4 years now, and we've been working on many different tools, services, overviews, inventories, all having to do with digital preservation. And all of that will be assembled in a Virtual Center of Excellence that will live longer than the project. And this is your chance to hear more about it. We are, I shall confess that in all honesty, we are recycling a few talks that we had at the conference, the closing conference of Project APARSEN in Brussels in October. And we know that it was in the middle of the conference season, so some people had difficulty attending that conference, and therefore we decided to repeat the best bits here in this webinar to give everybody an opportunity to pick it up. So on our program of today, we have 4 talks. The first one is a general overview of how the APARSEN Virtual Center of Excellence evolved over time and how we got here. Originally, Simon Lambert, our administrative project officer, was going to do this, but he just has had a baby boy, and his wife delivered a baby last week, so he has better things to do, which we all understand. After that, David Geretta will give a full overview of the Virtual Center of Excellence and what it will offer. Then we have a talk of Michael Drescher about the European grid infrastructure. However, Michael Drescher had a very last minute cancellation because he's stuck in moving house and has a few disasters to solve there and had to drop out. However, we shall be showing you his slides, and David will give you sort of a sneak view of the main message, and his full recorded presentation will be downloadable later today on YouTube, so all of you can hear it from the horse's mouth as well, because there you will see Michael Drescher actually speak. Then our last speaker of today is a guest speaker from CERN. That's Jamie Shears, who has an overview of challenges in data preservation and how the Virtual Center of Excellence fits into that. So then a few more household things again. People who joined, please put your affiliation and your organization in the chat box. Secondly, people who do not speak have to turn off their microphone. You will hear from my microphone a slight echo. I apologize for that. We couldn't get that away, but I will also turn off my microphone when I'm not speaking. And we don't have too many people now, but if more people join during the webinar, it will help if you either turn off your video or just put it on still, on a still picture. So far, so good. I think we're ready for the first talk, which will be mine. And maybe I can ask David to put the slides on the screen.
Okay,
there we go.
Do that. First of all, I'll share my screen.
And if you click the little box on the bottom of the screen where it says fit to screen, then you get a proper view of the slides. I trust everybody can see them. As you see, they're Simon's slides, but I'm happy to talk you through it. And it's all about how we got here. Next slide, please, David. Our journey in APARSEN started actually 10 years ago when there was an EU conference held in The Hague about permanent access to the records of science. It was the first conference in its sort, definitely the first one in Europe, held at the Royal Library. And the conclusion with all the people gathered there was that a European task force was needed for permanent access. This took a lot more talking and gathering the right groups around it, and this eventually led in 2008 in the establishment of a foundation, and the foundation was called APA, which is short for Alliance for Permanent Access to the Records of Science. And next slide, please, David. The foundation APA took some time to set its priorities and started a few initial projects, mainly to make an inventory of the field. And in 2011, it was ready for a much bigger project, which we named APARSEN. And as you can see, the first 4 letters still reflect the name of the foundation, the Alliance for Permanent Access for the Records of Science. And the European Commission was so kind to fund this under the 7th Framework Programme, which is for digital libraries and digital preservations. And the project started in January 2011. It was set up for 4 years, and therefore it's actually coming to its end and to the finish this month. And the main coordinator is the Science and Technology Facilities Council, STFC, in the UK, and that's also where Simon works. Next slide. The background for this project was, first of all, to really apply a broad scope. And the broad scope is in 3 different aspects. First of all, under APARSEN, we combine many different application domains. These vary from preservation of text, of data, of multimedia, but also in a broad variety of different partners involved, partners from research, partners from industry, but also partners with a background, for example, a memory institute, museums, archives. We really wanted to bring the whole world together there with all their different application domains. That also means, in terms of the broad scope, that we wanted to look at many different aspects of the problem. So these 4 years we've looked at what it means in terms of storage, persistent identifiers, representation information, scalability, rights management, but also less technical things like cost models, business models, etc., etc. And we had a very broad scope in different approaches and techniques. And this was mainly due to the broad variety of partners. We have more than 30 partners in APARSEN, and they all bring in their own approach and technique. All in all, this broad scope meant that we were trying to defragment all the efforts. We found out, and this was not a big surprise, that many wheels are being reinvented in the area of digital preservation. And by bringing together so many different partners, so many different application areas, so many different aspects of the problem, we really made an effort for defragmentation. All of this should lead to a virtual center of excellence that is founded on a common vision for digital preservation. And actually our last webinar, which we held in October, was all about that. And you can still look back at those presentations from the APARSEN website. All in all, we can summarize this in one simple message. We want digital preservation to be an enabler of future value. Next slide, please. Why so much attention for digital preservation? Well, to very simply sketch the background of this, 5 elements play a role here. First of all, there's the data deluge, which I think needs no further explanation. But the data deluge does bring the question to the surface how to gain benefit from all this ever increasing amount of information, and how is the value actually created from this. In terms of preservation, if more and more is being generated and created, what should actually be preserved for the future? Can we keep all, even if storage costs go down? You still need a lot of organization and curation around it. And you have to ensure the usability, which is the 4th element, and especially usability in the future. Because either the software that you need to look at information can become obsolete or no longer retrievable, or the formats in which stuff is stored can no longer be accessed, etc., etc. Or simply maybe the provenance information is not there and it's very hard to understand what the information actually means. So, as the 5th step, even before we started the project, we thought it would be very important to have a center of excellence where tools, services, consultancy and training would be brought together to ensure all these 4 steps that come before this. Next slide, please. The partners in APARSEN come from many different backgrounds. I already emphasized that in one of the previous slides. The majority of partners come from universities and research institutes, together with research data archives, I think. Also, some of the most noteworthy national libraries in Europe are represented in the project. And we have 2 important big science partners, ESA and CERN. And what really helped to broaden the view within the project was to have industrial partners, vendors, and several membership organizations with a very broad representation of libraries, of archives, and of publishers. If you click, David, I think we shall now see who were all the partners. You see there were more than 30. And as I said, most of them in the university and research realm, but also some big national libraries, some big research data archives, some big science players, etc., etc. Next slide, please. The approach of APARSEN had 2 dimensions. First of all, the work in these 4 years were split up in 4 parallel streams. And you see them on the left side of this slide. There were working packages focusing on integration, working packages focusing on technical research, then non-technical research like business models, cost models, and stream 4 was about sustainable uptake, outreach, and a lot of liaison with external partners. All these 4 streams were conceived around 4 important concepts. And the first one is trust. Without trust, digital preservation is impossible. You want to have some evidence how trustworthy information is, or how trustworthy the organizations are who act as the custodians of this information, etc., etc. Sustainability speaks for itself. Without sustainability built into an approach, and this has to do with cost modeling, business models, but also, for example, persistent identifiers, it is important, or it is impossible to work on digital preservation. Usability is, of course, in the core of everything, because digital preservation is really about future usability. And in all the streams, there was a lot of work dedicated to this. I think I can mention here the compatibility framework for persistent identifiers, the approach for storage management, scalability, etc., etc. And the same goes for access, of course. Next slide, please. All of this leads to, again, 4 steps that you've seen in the previous slide. From the background expertise of this great variety of different partners, we've been producing many results in all the APARSEN work packages. You can find these on the APARSEN website. And in an underlying stream, we've also worked with all the 30+ partners on a common vision. And that common vision leads to the Virtual Center of Excellence. Next slide, please. The common vision, and again, I refer back to the webinar we held about this in October, which can still be found on the APARSEN website. The common vision has as its main aim to bring coherence. And in the direction that it points and paints, it underpins the Virtual Center of Excellence. The main element in the common vision is about defragmentation. And the defragmentation is best achieved by positioning all the individual developments that we found with the different partners, but also that we brought together in the work packages. We've brought that all under a common framework so that we can better understand where we are jointly and also what still needs to be done. The features of the common vision are evidence-based. So the work you find under APARSEN is tested and proven. It reflects many different perspectives because all of the partners have been collaborating. And you'll also find several levels of detail. You'll find the bigger picture for those maybe at higher management levels, all the way down to very detailed techniques and models for down the ground workers. Right, next slide, please. The Virtual Center of Excellence, what can you expect? David will go into much more detail about this in the next talk, but generally speaking, maybe you've seen other Virtual Centers of Excellence already. We're following some precedents, like there's Impact, there's VCC 3D, there's PrestoCentre Foundation, there's OPF, the Open Planets Foundation. And what is the similarity that you find between all these Virtual Centers of Excellence? Most of all, they want to develop the excellence, they want to structure the excellence, they want to spread the excellence so that the excellence becomes accessible to all players in the field. Finally, the output of the APARSEN project is a blueprint for such a Center of Excellence to be implemented beyond the project. It is underpinned by the common vision that we developed together, and it also reflects the changing landscape. For example, we've now been looking with the project partners what would be the best house or environment for this virtual center of excellence to be established and to develop further. And the Research Data Alliance came up only 2 years ago, and we're now in discussions to see whether that would be a good environment to carry this stick further. Okay, next slide. So what we can say is this whole idea to work on digital preservation in this way started 10 years ago. It has led to the project APARSEN, on which we've all been very busy and very involved for the past 4 years. We're finishing this work now, but we're ready for a new journey, maybe under the flag of the Research Data Alliance, maybe under another flag. But this is not the end. This is just the end of the beginning. Next slide, please. To conclude, here you see all the partners in our project, and it's been great to work together, and we're sure that we will do many more things together. So, okay, thank you very much. I wanted to ask if anybody in the audience has questions about this bit of the webinar. If you click on your microphone, I can see whether you want to pose a question. But I see nobody there. I guess this was all very obvious and speaking for itself. So that means, David, I think we're ready for your talk, and you can hopefully explain us more what the Virtual Center of Excellence will bring us. Can I hand over to you?
Okay, yep, thank you, Yvka. Let me click a few buttons here, share my screen, and now I will not be able to see any of the chats while I'm presenting, so if you want to get my attention, please speak. This talk is about the Virtual Center of Excellence and what it offers. I will add something to what Yvka said, and that is that 4 or 5 years ago it was clear that something like this was needed, and I think recent developments have shown that this is even more true today, in that over the past 10 years in Europe, and I think the same is true in other countries, there's been a very, very large amount of funding gone into digital preservation research. But it seems likely that that will not happen, that will not continue into the future. So we have a great deal of research in digital preservation, but as was clear 4 or 5 years ago, this is not. This is very much very much fragmented. So the Virtual Center of Excellence is basically a problem solver, bringing together what we call the pioneers of digital preservation. You saw the names of the organizations up there. Many you'll recognize have been working on digital preservation for many, many years. But in fact, and indeed, what they've been doing has in general been quite different. And I mentioned the very large amount of funding in digital preservation research. Well, that has just the funding mechanisms themselves force that research to be different and new each time. So that's one reason why the research is fragmented. But there's something else, and that is the types of digital objects that are out there. We know, of course, the audiovisual, we mentioned PrestoCentre before, mentioned OPF, and there's the VCC3D for some 3D models. But there are many more types of digital objects than these, and there are more complex ones coming along in the data deluge. So how will we handle those? That's another big question that the VCoE was designed to answer, and the answers had to be evidence-based. Now, so basically the VCoE is a problem solver, so somebody comes with a problem, so we need to define a solution. So there is consultancy, bringing together the expertise across the board of all of the organizations you saw and many others. The solutions will probably involve tools and services, some software. So which tools are they? Which ones will work for your particular problem? That's where the evidence base comes in, because the things you use for audiovisual, preserving audiovisual digital objects will not be the same as you use for scientific objects. And then, of course, once the solution is in place, there will need to be some training. So this is where the consultancy, tools and services, and training comes from. So we've got different types of digital objects. I've mentioned rendered objects, the images, documents, sounds. We also have data. We do, I think, do need to preserve software. That's an important element. And also in several areas, although it seems strange to say, time-dependent objects, so things that change over time. Linked data is an important example of that. They need to be preserved, and different tools will be needed for these different sorts of objects. And there are many tools out there, and there are many lists. There's also a great deal of claim and counterclaim about the tools. There are many terminologies, many glossaries, many sources of information, not just from APARSEN, but if you put into a search engine digital preservation, you'll find a vast number of sources of information. So it seemed to us that if we're putting together solutions built on a whole set of different inputs, we needed some way to bring all of this together. We needed an integrated view. We needed to understand how the different pieces of research fit together. Does this research work for this piece of data or that type of digital object? Or indeed, is it not very useful for anything? There have to be some real study of these different and a vast amount of digital preservation research results. So of course we need some sort of model. Now there are many models out there, so an obvious question is why another? I'll just go through a number of these very quickly, so you'll recognize some of these related to many different organizations. Organizations come produce a particular model. If you look at this link, there are many, many more, and there are yet more, and they all look different, and some are more detailed than others. and they're just huge numbers. So I think the link up there points to, I think, 40 or 50 different models that are relevant for digital preservation. So we have put together yet another model, but it does come with an important background idea, and that is something that was not clear to us at the beginning of the project, but has been increasingly impressed on us, especially by the funders. So digital preservation, I mean, I guess those of us who are here in this webinar and the conferences are quite convinced about the need, but our funders really want to see value. Yvka alluded to that briefly in her talk. And digital preservation does cost resources, but the payback, if you purely think of long term, is it's not immediate. So the question comes up, and we've been asked this by many important funders on different sides of the Atlantic: who pays and why? So the Blue Ribbon Task Force provided some conceptual approaches to this. We need to identify at least the potential value of what we're preserving, and ideally we'd like to increase that likely value. And our approach here is to say that, given the basis of the OAIS reference model and the importance of usability, then the techniques that we use for preservation in terms of usability will play a key role, can play a key role in increasing the likely value of the digital objects. So here's the link. If you'll see a link also on the home page of the APA. So let's, and in particular, it's a clickable image that you'll find there. So here it is. On the website, each of these areas, the big arrows, the smaller things, the circles, they're all clickable. Even the words around the edge, the OAIS terminology plus extension and the training, they're all clickable, and they show you then pages that are essentially collections of the research, different projects research that we've looked into. So but just to explain this diagram, there is another webinar where we talked at length about this, but the idea is we've got preservation. Preservation is linked to usability, that's the OAIS view, and representation information is a key concept, the things you need in order to be able to use the digital objects. But you can add more representation information in order to let more people use the data, and that usability takes you into value. On the basis of value, you can put together business cases, and from those you can choose which to implement in a business model which produces ideally some benefits from those digital objects, which will help to justify the preservation. So I will not go into that in great detail. There are several documents about this and many different, detailed explanations that are available on the website. But if you click on, for example, training, and click through to the online courses, you'll see a whole collection of courses, each with a number of modules that are related to the integrated view. As Yvka said, there are different target audiences that will direct you to specific modules, and this we hope will be a major part of the APARSEN legacy. But these are recordings. It is also possible to arrange face-to-face training tailored specifically to solve your particular problem, and the trainers will be the digital experts, digital pioneers, preservation pioneers that we talked about earlier. There's also information about formal courses in universities and so forth. So a lot of information about training and training resources. Clicking on other parts of the diagram, for example on the preservation box, takes you to, this is just one part of it, takes you to a web page about what we call or the major part of it is what we call the asset base. So what are the things we've looked at in order to evaluate which of these different research activities, research projects have produced useful information. And you'll see there's a particular issue. I hope you'll recognize those things. The source, the particular asset, maybe a document, maybe a web page, and then the evidence, why we think this is a useful piece of a useful resource, a useful asset. And further down that page, we've tried to identify where the gaps are, because of course this is not complete. Despite the vast amount of resource that's gone into this, there are still areas which have not been investigated. Continuing a little further into the preservation activities, if you drill down into some of those links, you may well have heard colleagues, especially library colleagues, say the solution is emulate or migrate. But I think that that works very well, but in certain cases, not for it's not generally useful. So migration, you can repeat what you've done before, but, and this is especially a problem if you're looking for increased value, it's very difficult to use new applications combined with new data. Oh, my arrows are in the wrong place, sorry about that. So what I said first was about the emulation. The migration you can convert to a different format, but again, which software system are you going to look at? So these things, emulate or migrate, work in special cases, but it's hard to apply these to other types of digital objects, in specifically scientific data, and it's hard to see how to build cross-disciplinary communities to add value to the digital objects. What we've tried to do is to look at the digital preservation techniques, look for evidence, and the sorts of evidence are many different types. Some projects have produced detailed evidence. The Caspar project, for example, produced a very thick document about the evidence across many different types of data. Some are user scenarios of where a particular technique has been used and shown to be successful. So that's one sort of evidence, but we also need to make sure we understand where a particular technique works. So we've tried to classify different types of digital objects. This is just something so we can have a kind of checklist. So there's rendered or non-rendered, composite, simple, dynamic, static. I will not go into these in great detail, but there are several documents and information on the website about this. The point is that we can take a particular preservation technique and say, well, does it apply to rendered digital objects, so images, videos, and so forth, and does it apply to non-rendered, so scientific data? Does it similarly composite, simple, and so forth? It's a way to force us to think where a particular technique works, and we must look at all the different types of threats. So this is one. This only takes 3 dimensions there, but you can look at the different points, different coordinates within there. So this is a non-rendered static complex, simple object. Maybe a simple data set. But there are many other sorts of objects, and what we have tried to do is to force ourselves to look at the different techniques that are out there and to be clear in our minds what this is likely to work for. So this is important in terms of consultancy. If you or somebody out there has a problem, we need to be able to, a digital preservation problem, we need to be able to guide ourselves and guide others to think about what is likely, what we should look at first, let me put it that way, in terms of the techniques and tools that need to be looked at. We have done this in little detail in the list of tools. Again, there are many lists of tools out there. Ours is different in the sense that we are trying to produce and base this on evidence of preservation, linking software to types of data to evidence, looking at test beds and user scenarios. So this again is one of the resources we use in order to do the consultancy. Now, of course, this is available on the website, the public website, but of course and this will provide an initial view for somebody with a problem, but where this does not answer the problem completely, then the Virtual Centre of Excellence can provide consultancy. Here's an example of some of the lists of tools out there. The role in OEIS, the objectives of the tool, the sorts of evidence there are. And there is also a link to another project that I'll come back to, the SIDEPS project, which has been doing some work on a number of important tools. We're looking at other sorts of preservation services. One of the boxes there was services. Again, APARSEN has produced a number of rather weighty deliverables, but in each of those we've looked across the board at the work that's been done in this particular area. So Yvka mentioned trust, sustainability and so forth. Within trust, we've identified several different silos of research. We've looked into each of those silos. Here you've got authenticity and provenance. We've looked at all the work that we could about that, and then applied some critical analysis in order to be able to say which of the techniques, which of the research is useful and where it is useful. We've looked at other types of evidence, and we've got a number of tools that are available. I'll talk again about the SciDip collection of software. We also, Yvka mentioned that APA has was involved in a number of projects before APARSEN. One of them, the PARS Insight project, collected a massive amount of information which we still delve into in order to provide information about what thousands of researchers, data managers, publishers across disciplines and around the world think about digital preservation. So again, very much evidence-based. Let me come a little more into the area of preservation and software. So one of the views that we've had, and this has been implemented in the SciDip project, is we need to know that something's changed. We need to, because if nothing changed, why would we have to do anything in preservation? So we need to know that something's changed. There are technology watches, but really what we need to do is to be a little more imaginative, I think, in how we do this. We need to identify the implications of that change, decide on the best course of action, and so forth. What SciDip has done is to produce a number of tools. So we have what we call the orchestration service, to basically gather information from people. People have the knowledge about what's changed. People can also identify implications of that change, but we also have something that might help a little bit there, the gap identification service. So when things change, what we call gaps in terms of the usability of something, some digital object arise. We then need to decide on the best course of action. So we have some toolkits that help one investigate the different things that might be done in order to counteract these changes. One important aspect is we might need representation information in order to fill the gaps. That might be created by someone else, or we need to, in which case there's a registry again to share the information that other people have created, or we might need to create some new representation information. The digital objects might need to be transformed. That's the equivalent of migrate. In which case problems arise about data authenticity. We have tools to help there from the SciDip project. And we need to make sure that the data continues to be usable. So there are many things that we look at there from the SciDip project, which are part of the Virtual Centre of Excellence. From the PARS Insight project I mentioned, a number of threats were recognized across the board, so across disciplines, across the world. And so you can see the threats there, the requirement for solutions. I'm not going to go into these in detail, but this is another piece of evidence that the tools that we talk about do, or have the possibility at least, help to counter these threats. So we have the tools there. I'm not going to go into them. You can look at this presentation offline. But in each of these things we have the ability, and in that bottom one there, the certification toolkit, we have strong links to the ISO 16363 work. We've provided input to the standard, and many of the things which those test audits have discovered as weaknesses in the repositories, these services and related tools help to improve those repositories. So this was the test audit findings. These were the really common across all of the repositories we looked at. Weaknesses in those repositories: lack of definition of a designated community, lack of adequate representation information, lack of archival information packages, lack of handover plans. So in all of these areas, these tools, built on top of the research that APA and APARSEN have done together, look like a solid basis for improving repositories. So I've talked a lot about digital preservation. If you click on the terminology part of the that clickable model, you'll find the digital preservation glossary. The question is, why do we need another when in fact there are so many out there? What this tries to do is somewhat different. Again, we're trying to integrate all of these different glossaries, and so you may be familiar with some or all of these I've mentioned. So there's the OAIS, the SNEER, that's the manufacturer's glossary, Interpares. What we've tried to do is to use SCOS, which is the Simple Knowledge Organization System, and that allows us to say, given a term, which are the broader terms, possibly in the other glossaries, which are narrower, which are related. Each term also has a URI, so that can be referred to separately. Sorry, I can hear somebody talking. I'm sorry, I cannot see any of the chat because I'm showing my screen. So if I stop talking for a minute, please ask a question. If not, then I'll continue. This is an example
David,
from
I
that
think
gloss.
I didn't hear anybody else talking.
If not, then I'll...
Yeah, please do.
Okay, it must have been just an echo. Okay, so here's from the glossary representation information, and here are some of the narrower, broader, related terms from several of those other glossaries that are out there. So this is another of our ways of trying to bring this fragmented work in digital preservation together. There are also many standards out there, so we've tried to, we've got an online version of a standards database. We've been working with the Presto project in order to have something that's common, and you can again use this to try to find which standards might already exist that will is useful for your particular piece of work. There was a talk at the conference in Brussels, all of the which gave a lot of details about this. All of those will be online on the APA site. We work closely with several of the standards, in particular the OAIS and the ISO audit and certification work. And And essentially, what we want to do is to provide solutions based on this evidence, based on the vast amount of research that has already been undertaken. But there are many possible solution providers, APA, other organizations. We have links to the developing new standards. We have links to the Research Data Alliance. There are two groups in there about active data management plans and preservation infrastructures, which are particularly important. And so we're carrying all of this forward, as Yvka said, in through these different channels. So, in summary, what we have is essentially solutions to problems through consultancy, tools and services and training, and all of that is based on the experience and expertise of the digital pioneers, the evidence-based tools. We've tried really hard to collect together that evidence, and we've tried to see if we can identify which technique, which tool, which service works for which sort of digital object. And we have some way that we can address new sorts of objects to at least show us, give us a hint of which tool, which technique, which service to try first. All of this, including maybe especially the training, comes from many different sources, as you've seen, these digital preservation pioneers. The consistency between the advice, the consultancy, the training and so forth comes from this integrated view. The terminology is brought together by the glossary, and the standards base provides a standards database provides a very useful underpinning to all of this. And I should really stress again that everything we do is consistent with and indeed has contributed to the OEIS reference model and the audit and certification work. So all the resources are available on the website, or you can contact me at either of these two email addresses, and I'll finish there. So I'm going to stop the screen sharing. And I'm ready for any other questions.
Thank you, David. That was a very nice. Let's see if there are any questions. People who wish to pose a question can do so by clicking on the microphone on the right side of the screen. I don't think there's anybody there. By the way, all the slides and the recording of the presentation will be put on the APARSEN website, so you can all review it later on. I think this must mean that it was all crystal clear, David. Thank you. And I also note that we have our next speaker here, Jamie Shears, will tell us more about all the challenges in digital preservation. Jamie, I know you've been quietly testing your microphone. Can we test it out in the open now? See if it works?
Yes, hello, this is well.
Ah, yeah, I can hear you, but I think it should be a bit louder. You can do that by raising the arrow left to the microphone. A bit more, maybe? Yeah.
100%.
Okay, that is much better. Then I will turn off my microphone, because it always helps if we have few microphones on as we can. And David will share the slides on the screen, and then the floor is yours. Jamie, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
So you should see your slides now. Just
Okay,
tell
this
me
is
when to
someone
move
else's
forward.
presentation.
Yeah.
This is my presentation. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm not going to talk about all of the challenges of the next decade, clearly just some of the ones, and in particular the ones that are associated with very large volumes of data. And this is why I have a little picture of right here up in the top right-hand corner, because his famous quote is "to infinity and beyond." So this is about data preservation at the exascale and beyond. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So this is basically an introductory slide recapping what I believe you've heard already this afternoon, and that is that thanks to a great deal of work that has been done over the last decade or so, we are at the point where we understand rather well the basic infrastructures needed for data preservation, and we could actually put something in place, something particularly that would be suitable for multiple disciplines. And this, as David has been explaining to you, is built on a number of well-recognized standards, including mechanisms for certifying the repositories and even mechanisms for certifying the certifiers. In parallel to that, but something that I don't think has been discussed, is that there are other projects who have been looking at business cases and cost models, and we also have the pressure from the funding agent to them, not only what are the cost benefits, but also even requiring that we have data preservation plans and data management plans. So this is basically the background to where I want to start. Next slide, please. What I think is still not really solved is the whole issue of long-term sustainability, where I'm talking about at least several decades, maybe a century, maybe even longer. And there are different aspects here. The technical aspects of how you actually provide even basic level preservation over 100 years. And there are papers you can read about this, for example, by David Rosenthal, that highlight some of the difficulties. But there are other less technical issues. And if you want to save your data for a century, which service provider can you go to that can really guarantee that they will even be there in 1 century from now? And so I want to ask the question, rhetorically of course, whether this is even a realistic goal, and even if it's a desirable one. Can we move to the next slide, please? Very recently, another project, an FP7 project, 4C, a collaboration to clarify the cost of curation, has delivered its roadmap, which was presented in London a few weeks ago. And this had 6 key elements. And I think all of them very relevant for the discussion this afternoon. And I will go through some of them in more detail. The first one is you have to identify the value of your digital assets and make choices. Here, as I will try and explain in a moment, the choices really are discipline specific. There's no general rule of thumb that you have to all of your data or 10% of your data. It really does depend on your community and your business case, so to speak. What is really more fundamental to what I want to get across are the next 3 points about demanding and choosing more efficient systems, scalable services and infrastructure, and designing digital curation as a sustainable service. The other 2 points we'll come back to later, but they're somehow implicit in the above. Can we go to the next slide, please? Here you see two examples of very large-scale data preservation projects, and they are quite different in nature. In the top left, you see this is a picture that's supposed to depict the square kilometer array, and in the bottom right, you see the LHC machine in a tunnel 100 meters underground at CERN. And these are very, very different machines. In the one case, you are making observations of the universe, which by definition are unrepeatable. If you miss something or you lose the data or it gets corrupted, you can make another observation, but it will be of something different in time. On the other hand, if you have something closer to a factory like the LHC machine, lose the data, you can, in principle, rerun and generate data that's statistically, scientifically equivalent. There are many, many other disciplines. These are two that I know. For example, when the 4C report was presented, some people were there representing paper archives or digitized archives. And there, the choices are really very, very different to what I would call more scientific, where there might even be rules or agreed standards. For example, you might keep data for 100 years or even less. My bank, when I connect to look at my bank statements, against each item, it tells me how long it will be available for, and it's typically 30 years. So that is their policy, that they will keep those records available for 30 years and no longer, which probably is to satisfy a legal requirement, but it's not sufficient to satisfy a scientific requirement. Can we move to the next slide, please? Now, one of the problems with very large-scale bit preservation, which I know is a very, very small part of the whole problem, is that people often assume that it's actually trivial or someone solved it. The second statement may be true, but it's actually very, very far from trivial. And it even is getting more difficult with time. Depends obviously on the technology you are using and the volume of data that you have. But if you're talking about significant volumes, let's start with hundreds of terabytes, petabytes, hundreds of petabytes and beyond, you're talking about technology that really is at the leading or bleeding edge, where the number of sites that actually have the knowledge and skills to deploy this technology is probably getting smaller with time. What we have learned at CERN is, whereas 2 decades ago we were very happy that users were allowed to manipulate the tapes themselves, literally go into the tape vault and even touch the media, this is completely impossible these days, where actually even having humans enter the room, it has to be highly regulated. And it won't be long before people have to wear protective clothing, cover their shoes, and even a face mask, because the tiniest particle can be highly degrading. And you can lose, and people do lose, vast amounts of data just through simple dust problems, or the famous story of the first bug with an insect, which has happened recently. And these days, an insect actually corresponds to a massive amount of data, because the medium is so dense. So this links back to the message from 4C, is I think when we're talking about efficient systems and scalable systems, we have to be at something where there are service providers who are providing these very high-end services, and not everybody is trying to do it in their garage or in their basement. It simply will not be scalable and certainly will not be affordable. Can we move to the next slide, please? So there's evidence that some other people are convinced of these problems. In the round of Horizon 2020, in E-Infra 1, which covered a range of, there was one item that explicitly talked about these very large 2020 plus data factory requirements, way beyond petabytes and exabytes. It talked about zettabytes and trillions of objects. And as we have seen from the PLHC, and as we are seeing now as people prepare for things like the square kilometer array and the telescope array, these projects you have to prepare decades in advance. And so if we are looking to zettabytes, we really need to start doing R&D, eventually choices, and then service hardening and delivery, even though the projects are really a long way off. Can we move to the next slide, please? These are the same two projects that I showed pictorially before, and the point I want to make here really is not the details about the projects themselves. The HL-LHC might start in the middle of the next decade, so about 10 years from now, 15 years, and by the time it completes, we might have something like 10 exabytes of data. The square kilometer array might run for, actually, the number I heard was something up to 7 decades. But what typifies these next generation data factories that the Horizon 2020 program is concerned about is their scale in several dimensions. Firstly, the cost, the longevity, lasting as long as a single person's career, or maybe even models. In the case of the square kilometer array, it runs for 70 years. So they last for decades, they cost at least billions of euros, and the data volumes are in the exa or the zettabyte range. So the exa is 10 to the 18 bytes, zetta is 10 to 21. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, on the other side, we have the funding agencies who are now telling us that we need to be much more formal and methodical about this. And the slide I tend to use is this one here, which is a summary of the US Department of Energy requirements. And one thing to notice is that it starts off by saying that all proposals submitted after the 1st of October 2014. So this is already in effect. This is not just new proposals, it's also repeat funding for existing projects. As this statement says, data management plans need to describe how data is shared and preserved. There is a sort of a let-up clause that you can actually explain why you shouldn't preserve your data, but I assume is not to be taken seriously. If you expect to be funded, you better have a pretty watertight and measurable data management plan in place. And as a minimum, the final statement on this slide, you find that data management plans must describe how data sharing and preservation will enable validation of results. And all of these are actually can be very difficult to achieve. Firstly, you have to demonstrate how you might be preserving your petabytes or exabytes. And validation of results, such as the results that led to the discovery of the Higgs boson, are highly non-trivial to reproduce. And they typically require teams of many tens of people. And as you may remember, the first signs of the Higgs boson were announced something like 9 months before we were able to claim a discovery. And so during that period, there were teams of probably 500 in each experiment working more or less day and night to get the final result. 9 months of work times a few hundred people. Can we go to the next slide, please? As I've indicated, the data volumes we expect to see in the next decade or so will completely dwarf what we have today. And I think you can see that pictorially here. We are just at the start of LHC data taking, where between run 2, we explore in energy, roughly speaking. But you see that we're simply, this is completely peanuts to what is expected in 10 years from now. This slide is already a year out of date, where it was predicting something like 400 petabytes a year of raw data. Already 1 year later, that number has grown to about 500. And it will probably rise further still, which is why I say that, 10 years of data taking, we will easily get to the multi-exabyte range, and by the time HLHC stops, we will reach about 10 exabytes of data. Can we go to the next slide, please? These next two slides have rather a lot of detail, and I certainly don't want to read through every single bullet. I just want to try and emphasize some of the applications in providing this very large-scale storage. Across the sites, the high geophysics sites of which CERN is a member, we have a collaboration to try and organize our and streamline our IT activities. We have something like 20 sites here. And what we discovered in doing a survey of how they archive the data, I hesitate to use a stronger word like preserved it, we saw a very, very large difference in practices and a very, very large difference in results. When the survey was done, which was about 18 months ago, the best sites were 10,000 times less likely to lose your data than the worst, and vice versa. So the worst sites were 10,000 times more likely to lose your data than the best sites. And these are sites that all participate in the WSCG grid, so they're all sites that should have many, many years of delivering production services. It simply is something that is highly non-trivial. It requires a lot of dedicated people and knowledge, and it's why I believe that it is better to have a smaller number of very large archives than a large number of small and less reliable archives. Can we go to the next slide, please? We have two aspects to how we handle the verification of reliability. One is that we constantly scan all of the data for errors or potential errors. And at the same time, we migrate all of the data forward to the latest media, depending on the vendor's cycles, which is typically every 3 years. This means that the volume of data you are migrating is increasing and increasing with time, and hopefully your error rate is going down. And in fact, we see that is the annual bit loss rate has gone down from 10 to the minus 12 in 2009 to 10 to the minus 16 in 2012. This might sound very small, but then when you talk about very large volumes of data, if we talk about 10 to the 18 bytes, it means that you are still seeing a significant number of unrecoverable data in error. I think it's important that service providers are transparent about the service that they offer. No service, no matter how well you design it or how much you charge for it, can ever protect against all forms of data loss. But you have to get to a point where increasing investment is giving you diminishing returns, and we think we're at that level now. So this is for single copies. In addition to this, I recommend to have at least a second copy of the data, and what is done for the CERN data, for the LHC data, is that second copy is at a different site, typically in a completely different system with a different software layer and a different hardware layer. So the probability of having two files affected by a data loss is very, very low, but still non-zero. If we move to the next slide, please. These next two slides I'm going to go through very quickly. What we have first is an approximation of the growth of the LHC data volume from 100 petabytes today to something like 10 exabytes in the late 2030s. I don't really want to say any more about this slide, and if we go to the next one, please, I should have perhaps put them together. What we see here is that the cost, and why this graph has some structure, is simply because of the schedule of the data taking and the schedule of the repack to higher density media. The important point here is that despite it growing from 100 petabytes to more than 10 exabytes, we expect the average annual cost for bit storage, again, single copy, no additional costs for all of the knowledge capture and preservation, to be roughly $2 million a year over this period. And if you look at the far right, you see, say in 2040 and in the early 2040s, what you're talking about is this is a 3-year bin. You're talking about $1 million for 10 exabytes. So if you scale that down to the cost for storing just 1 exabyte, it's about $100,000 per year. So this means that in the long term, the storage costs are not going to be the dominating factor. And I think establishes some sort of benchmark of where we need to be with the other costs. It's almost certain that even though these costs might look very significant today, by the time we get there in 15, 20 years, the costs that risk to dominate by far are all the manpower costs associated with the knowledge retention and so forth. Now, it's all very well to offer this very large storage capacity, but how can you actually guarantee to the users in any meaningful way that what you're offering is a reliable service? Can we move to the next slide, please? And I think the answer, or at least part of the answer, is the certification route. And here are some reasons why I believe it makes sense. This helps align the policies and practices across sites. I think this is particularly important if you believe that you need multiple copies. If the way that the different sites maintain those copies is completely different, you might end up with one reliable copy and one unreliable copy, which essentially means you have no safety net at all. By working together across sites, we can, I think, improve the reliability and eliminate duplication of effort. And this is something that's very important if we want to address reducing to the minimum the cost of curation. I believe it also helps address the data management plan issue raised by the funding agencies. I believe this can be simply a line item as part of the data management plan. Our strategy is to store multiple copies of our data in certified sites. As there's a procedure for certifying the sites, it's not a certification that lasts forever, it has to be renewed. I think there's some value in this and something that the funding agencies will respect. I believe it also increases the trust between the customers and the service providers with respect to the stewardship of the data. Stewardship is a word that seemed to be gaining in popularity around the RBA meeting in September. And I quite like it because, as opposed to the term data preservation or data curation, which a lot of people think there's something that people can worry about later, I think data stewardship conveys the notion that you must worry about it all the time, and I think that's actually very true. The final point is more an internal one, but I think it is also valid. As we go forward, I believe that sites that are certified can increase their attractiveness to suitable projects in Horizon 2020 and other funding rounds, and also to different communities that they want to offer their services to. Can we move to the next slide, please? I would now like to position what I've been saying in terms of what we physics. And basically what we would like to achieve is that by the year 2020, we have basically a solution that's sustainable and is in place, whereby all of our archive data, all of the data that we have decided should be preserved for, is easily findable, is usable by the designated communities. As we know, the different communities have very, very different requirements, and you have to decide upfront who you're getting your data for. We would like to do this. We believe the only sensible way to do this is in common with other disciplines, benefiting from their knowledge and experience, whilst at the same time contributing ours, so that together we have something that is much more powerful than would be done if we all work independently. And one element of this is a portal, and if we move to the next slide, some of you may have heard that we made a first release of such a portal available a couple of weeks ago. This is definitely a first release, but it has already two areas, two quite different consumers. Data that's made available for educational outreach, where it's clear you put a lot of effort in making it understandable and usable by less expert communities. Whereas we also have a tab for basically the community, so they can reuse and revalidate their data. To my final slide, there is a takeaway message, but I do that because it's just repeating what I've said. Next generation data factories, which are only around the corner, will bring with them many challenges for computing, network, and in particular storage. Data preservation and management in general is going to be key to their success, and it must be an integral part of these projects, not an afterthought. And as I said earlier, raw bit preservation costs may drop to as low as $100,000 per year per exabyte over the next 25 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. This was a very interesting overview. Let's see if anybody in the audience has highlighted. I see no questions here. I have one question about the slides with the cost projections up until, what was it, 2043 or something like that. I was surprised to see such a big share taken by tape storage, and also in some years it occurred and in some years it was not there. I wasn't even aware that tape storage was still so so prominent, but also I was wondering why it sometimes appears and sometimes disappears.
So for a long time people have been predicting the death of tape, about 2 decades at least. We believe that for the very large volumes that we have, it's the most cost effective, particularly given the usage cycle. We have a disk cache in front. In this model, there's 10% disk cache. You can vary that. You can take the Excel spreadsheet and you can put whatever you like, 5%, 50%, 95%. The reason why there's structure is simply because the repack to new media doesn't happen all the time. It happens about every 3 years. And it's even more complicated than that because normally you can reuse the same media once or twice, then you have to throw them away or sell them. You can't reuse them at the higher densities. And occasionally, even the robotic hardware is no longer upward compatible. So you have some costs which are not constant. It is just an approximation of what we will see. But again, to take the spreadsheet, which I can provide people, you can change these parameters. You can say that you reuse the media 0 times or 3 times, and different things to see the effect. Projecting out so long is obviously a very, very long way to say that it will happen exactly like this.
Okay, that's very clear. Something new to me, but very interesting. Thank you. I'm looking through the list again to see if there's anybody else with a question. I don't think so. In that case, Jamie, I want to thank you a lot. You were today's guest speaker and definitely bringing in some new perspectives from the big data environment in the high energy physics community. Thank you very much. We have one more talk left. That is to say, we have the slide, but not the speaker, because our speaker had to send us a very last minute cancellation. It's Michael Drescher of the European Grid Infrastructure. However, we do have a recorded talk by him, and we shall be uploading that onto YouTube, where you can find it later today. We will put the link on the APARSEN website, so stay tuned for that. To give you a little teaser to that talk, David will take us through the 20 slides that we have, and he also has sort of the higher level message, but not, of course, the complete talk with it. So for those interested, please stay connected, because you'll get sort of a helicopter view of what is in that talk. And if you want to hear the detail, later on, look at the complete talk on YouTube. Okay, here comes Michael Drescher's talk, and I hand over to David to give it a bit of background.
Okay, thank you, Yvka. I hope you can hear me. So I, of course, cannot do this justice,
Yes,
but
we can.
okay. So Michael wanted to provide a couple of messages. One is the value of data. This, in some ways, will be obvious to those who are attending this webinar, but it's interesting to see the views of somebody who is, to a certain extent, outside the normal community. Then, for those, I suspect many people will not know very much about the European Grid Initiative, infrastructure rather, and then how the EGI can support digital preservation. So I'm going to go very quickly through these slides. I apologize for that. So there are many different sorts of data, cultural and so forth, and increasingly the vast deluge that Jamie has just talked about. We see a picture of one of the LHC detectors, views from satellites of the Earth, vast amounts of data there, and in the bottom right, gene sequencing, which is producing vast amounts of data. And the danger, and here's an interesting picture, we generate, we use, and the danger is that it rots away or it's destroyed in some way. Michael talked about occult knowledge, hidden knowledge. There's the cost of preservation. This has come up several times. Jamie, especially about the cost of preservation. And there's a general flow of these things. A number of key questions that people who are concerned with digital preservation need to ask. The basic who, what, when, where, and how. Each of those have a number of sub-questions. If you look at this offline and think about it, some of these are very illuminating questions to try to answer. So that, I guess, in a certain way is common currency amongst some, but not amongst others. And here it's interesting, just as we heard from Jamie, we're kind of crossing from the preservation focused area to the wider world out there. So the European grid infrastructure is an important part of the European research area's backbone. You'll see lots more information at that URL. The interesting point from my point of view, Michael would perhaps put this a little differently, is that there are lots of there's lots of storage capability. Of course, Jamie talked about the massive capabilities at CERN, but for perhaps not so much for long-term preservation across the board, but for at least temporary storage, especially close to the compute facilities, there's a great deal of heterogeneous services out there. What the EGI is doing is, by analogy with APARSEN, it's defragmenting this heterogeneous situation. It's providing uniform access, and it's federating these services, bringing them together, and a whole variety, not just the publicly funded, but the institutional and the commercial providers, with the idea being that it's free at the point of, or rather there's free at the point of delivery, or there's pay-per-use, a variety of different sorts of models. EGI is massive. You see 340 data centers, other national initiatives scattered across the world, with more than 200 international research communities, many different disciplines. So the EGI is a massive, massive concern. It's talking about the federated cloud, the compute cloud, the storage cloud, and also it talks about an image repository. In other words, somebody has a virtual machine that does something that you want to use. Well, it's very close to what we talk about in terms of emulation, but it's in particular providing software capability on demand at the time and place that you need it, and it's to support it, the interoperability and the openness. There are open standards, open source software. Again, you'll be able to hear Michael talk in great detail about this on the recorded talk on the website. So we're talking also about community-driven innovations, adding value. And now I'm coming very quickly, I'm not doing this justice, but to how the EGI can help digital preservation. So we're talking about generation, use, and very importantly, reuse. So the EGI signed a memorandum of understanding with the APARSEN project, talking about services, investigation of business models, looking at future opportunities, and in the overall research data value chain, we can see a number of key players there, and in particular these are the placements of APARSEN, digital preservation experts, and EGI, the e-infrastructure operators. And these form part of this whole set of capabilities, the cycle, yet another cycle of ways to get benefit from the, at the very least, the deluge of data that's out there, and the smaller but very important data sets which add value to all of these things. So here is a picture of preservation as a service. You may recognize some of these things, the representation information registries, some of the other things about provenance services. Those are things which APARSEN has looked at in detail, and some of them have been made into services by the CIDEP project, and the EGI provides a platform for massively scaling these offerings to be much more widely used, much more easily usable, without requiring dedicated facilities. So this is one of the key offerings of the EGI to digital preservation. And of course, we talked in passing about preservation. Of course, that could need massive amounts of compute storage, and of course various pieces of software that might be in one of the existing virtual machines. So again, a great opportunity to help us provide digital preservation solutions. We can see here the different capabilities. On the one side, the ICT services, largely under EGI, the consultancy under APARSEN, Virtual Centre of Excellence, and the training, which has to include both. So I talked previously about digital preservation training, but the use of the ICT training is something that can be provided by the EGI. So that would be one of the sources of training put together into a solution by the VCoE. And it ties in, as you'll see there, with what Jamie said, what I said about the certification of digital repositories. So that is my very brief rendering of Michael's talk. You'll see a much better version on the APA website. So I may be able to answer some questions, but
thank you, David. That was a very nice and brief overview. Yeah? Yes, well, let's try. Let's see. And otherwise, we refer again to the full YouTube version by Michael Drescher himself. The link will be on our APARSEN website later. Let's see. Anybody who has a question can click on the mic, because then your name will highlight and I'll hand over to you. But I see no questions, David. So I think this was a good and brief overview. That brings us on. It also brings us to the end of the final APARSEN webinar that we have. The project is closing by the end of this month, or actually, because of all the holidays, a bit earlier. There will be a lot of information on the final deliverables and on all the overviews for courses, training portals, tools and services that will be offered. You can find all of that on the APARSEN website. So please keep a good old-fashioned bookmark to that and keep following what's happening there. And for now, I want to thank everybody who was here. I want to thank everybody who has been joining these webinars on a regular basis. I think they were a very useful tool to reach out to tell the world outside our project what was happening here. And with that, I'm going to close off. Thank you all very much.
Sorry, Yveske, I'd just like to express my thanks to you for for driving this webinar series. It's been tough sometimes.
Thank you,
You've been
David.
tough, but very fair.
Well, overall it was fun doing it, and you were always there, so I can thank you equally. Okay, bye-bye now for everybody.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. Bye.
Bye-bye.